Kim's face fell when she was reminded of her lackluster progress. The Leviathan Unit's leader has been training me while you were gone, but I can't seem to get the hang of cultivating. I can't come with you to the Elysian realm yet. That's okay, don't rush it. Most martial artists never break through to the true immortal realm. It depends on your potential and fate. Even if you don't get there, cultivation strengthens your body and extends your lifespan. It's beneficial in the long run. Stephen flipped through the documents on the desk. In the short time he'd been gone, the companies he'd had his eye on had developed significantly, but their success wouldn't help him in the Elysian realm. They use a different currency in the Elysian realm. I have almost no money on me. Developing a business from scratch is too hard to accomplish. My competitors have more connections, and their cultivations are also higher. There's not much I can do if they force me to close my business. But it just so happens that the expeditionary team frequently visits the 6 realms. They go through their supply of weapons really fast. Our world has been at peace lately, and our military factories aren't producing that many weapons. I was thinking we can boost our economy by forging weapons and selling them to the Elysian realm. Kim stood up from the couch, brimming with determination. I'll make arrangements right away. You have other things to take care of, right? You should get going. Right now? We spent less than 2 hours together. This is more important. I can't let my husband wander the streets of another realm penniless. Kim gave Stephen a hug and sent him on his way. He reluctantly left the office. After checking up on the Leviathan unit and the palace, and seeing his daughter at home, he drove to the outskirts of Annapolis. He found Thierry in the training ground. His carefree lifestyle was similar to Tristan's. He was always drinking and looking for entertaining ways to pass the time. Stephen knew exactly what Thierry had been up to because his lavish spending was recorded in his bank account. Thierry waved and greeted him with a smile. You're finally back. How did it go? Did you pass? Yeah, but mostly because of luck. The other participants were a lot stronger than me. I wouldn't have made it without Liam. Thierry couldn't stop grinning. I knew giving you the invitation was the right decision. It wasn't easy to steal one, but my efforts paid off. When he stole treasures in the future, he wouldn't have to worry about the Mystic Covenant tracking him down. With Stephen as his reliable spy, he would know exactly where their missions were taking place and avoid running into them. Actually, I have something to talk to you about, Stephen said. The Dragon Clan's prophet helped me a lot when I was preparing for the recruitment. His condition was for me to ask you to return the medicinal fossils you stole. Is that okay with you? After hearing all that, Thierry couldn't be too petty. Besides, if he and the prophet got along, he might be able to help Stephen fit in with the expeditionary team and predict the dangers he'd encounter during missions. Thierry handed Stephen a handful of translucent amber-colored stones. There were strange plants stored inside. Here you go. Give it to the prophet. From now on, I'll avoid the Dragon Clan when I'm searching for treasures. Stephen opened another spatial rift with the bone blade. His next destination was the Asura realm. The city on the foot of the Myriad Mountains was beginning to resemble a modern city from the human and Elysian realms. The buildings were more complex than the Asura's villages and towns. Killian's follower, Briar, gave Stephen an enthusiastic welcome and led him to the extravagant building. Stephen was amazed by the books on Killian's shelf. Are you interested in industrial science and technology? The orcs recommended them to me, Killian replied with a shrug. They're informative, but not particularly interesting. Stephen laughed. You mean they're boring? I've read them too, and I have to agree. I'm actually here to tell you about the Asura King. He hasn't given up on this realm. He's negotiating with the Mystic Covenant's higher-ups, and there's a high chance he'll come back with the Asuras. Needless to say, Killian was less than pleased. It wasn't easy for the beasts to regain their freedom. He says it's a negotiation, but the truth is he's filing a complaint, because he's too scared to face us on his own. What do you think about the Mystic Covenant? Stephen asked. Are they strong? I was selected to join their expeditionary team. In a head-on battle, the beasts only have 20% chance of winning against them, Killian admitted. That low? They're not called the #1 martial arts faction among the 6 realms for nothing. When you see them in action, you'll understand what I mean. If their squad of berserkers didn't rebel, they would be even stronger. Stephen had only just been selected to join the faction. He didn't have the authority to influence the higher-ups or make decisions. If the Mystic Covenant gave the Asuras permission to share the land with the beasts, the only way to keep them in check was to get rid of them in secret. The higher-ups and the Asura king hadn't come to an agreement yet, so all Killian could do was wait. After visiting the Asura realm, Stephen continued on his way to the Elysian realm. The prophet was anticipating his visit at the Dragon Clan's castle. He'd heard that Stephen had passed the recruitment and was waiting to tell him the good news. Stephen was flattered to find a table of food and wine prepared for him in the garden. "You didn't need to go through all this trouble. I have the medicinal fossils." Joining the expeditionary team is something worth celebrating. We're teacher and student in name only, but this is the least I can do. It would be rude to turn down the prophet when he'd prepared this just for him, so Stephen sat down and took a sip of wine. It was sweet and bitter. A tingling sensation rushed into his mind. He didn't know how it was prepared, but it contained a considerable amount of spiritual energy. The prophet pocketed the medicinal fossils and watched Stephen with a smile. His impression of him had changed drastically. "I saw your future. Your business will be expanding soon, and the Dragon Clan would like 10% of your shares." "Thank you for the investment, but would you be able to tell me the details? To be honest, my jewelry store hasn't been doing very well." The only valuable Stephen had on him was the amethyst bank card from Vivian. Yvonne and Vivian had given the ancient cultivators their bank cards because they knew they had almost no funds in his account. His half-dead jewelry store was the same as always. Most of the customers came to take a look, but there weren't too many of them in danger. They didn't need a divination. In addition, Shadow was secretly deterring customers from going to his store. Letting their doors stay open was a small mercy. "Consider my divination a bonus to my clan's investment," the prophet said. "Your business partner is the blacksmith, Mariah. He's going to retire earlier than planned, and he'll leave his factory to you." "He has so many students with much more experience in forging than me. Why would he give me the factory?" "There are many businesses across the 5 domains trying to win Mariah over. He'll make more enemies no matter who he chooses to work with. The competition has been getting worse lately, and even his daughter was kidnapped. That's why he wants to retire as soon as he can. You've just descended to the Elysian realm, but you don't belong to any faction. You recently found a prestigious backer like the Mystic Covenant. You're the best candidate to take over the factory and all the conflicts it comes with." It sounded scary, but danger often accompanied opportunities. As the saying goes, a teacher for a day, a father for a lifetime. Mariah valued his students over Stephen, but to protect his people he cared about and his life's work, he had to use an outsider as a shield. Stephen was fine with that. Mariah's forging skills were second to none, and their interests aligned. It was a win-win situation. "It's dangerous to go around alone in the Elysian realm," the prophet continued. "My clan can train your companions. Feel free to bring them here to cultivate. They'll progress faster." The prophet was making a generous offer. To help Stephen establish his business more smoothly, he'd also been given the iridescent dragon's special training. Stephen thought he was benefiting a little much, but maybe his business would be more successful than he thought, and that was why the Dragon Clan was making such a big investment. He decided to invite the Guardians of Hellcrown Palace to the Dragon Clan's castle for a chance to ascend. They had one of the highest cultivations out of everyone he knew. They were experienced, capable, and one of the closest companions he had. He missed having them around. As Stephen finished his glass of wine, he remembered something he'd been wondering about, and only the prophet would know the answer. At the end of the 3rd round, he'd been so caught up in making sure that Liam would be brought back to the Haven domain safely that he'd forgotten about Thorin. It wasn't until they returned to the courtyard that he realized that the Mystic Covenant didn't select him to join the expeditionary team, and left him in Necropolis to die. He'd used one of Dr. Dalton's special darts to implant an AI chip in his brain. It was a waste to leave him there. The prophet was silent for a moment as he divined Thorin's location. He's still alive. His vitality wasn't completely absorbed by the souls. I believe it's because he has a mark from the Sanctum realm, so he managed to escape. He's in a meditative state in an isolated area in Necropolis. I'm not sure if he's strong enough to open a spatial rift and come back to the Elysian realm. When the Lady of Dreams took 50 years off Lauren's lifespan, his aura had been contaminated with energy from the Sanctum realm. As long as he had the mark, he wouldn't die to the souls in Necropolis. Stephen decided to leave him there for now. He had more important things to do right now. He couldn't risk another trip to that creepy city. Stephen finished his meal with the prophet and politely said his goodbyes. He went to Minori City to find Vivian. If his business partner really was Mariah, he needed to bring Vivian along to earn his trust. The Ballantine family had been working with Mariah for many years. They were close collaborators. At the Ballantine family's mansion, the bodyguards and the staff treated Stephen like a distinguished guest. Even though his cultivation was low, passing the recruitment and joining the expeditionary team proved that he was a rare talent. They led him to the living room. Vivian was lounging on the couch eating snacks. "I didn't think I'd see you so soon. The other participants are busy cultivating to make a good impression on the Mystic Covenant's elders. None of them are wasting their time strolling the streets like you." Vivian was enjoying her peace and quiet. There were several participants, like Shaddle, who'd been pursuing her. All of them had disappeared at the same time to focus on their cultivation, to prepare for their first day at the Mystic Covenant. Her father also couldn't openly go against his promise to accept Stephen as his future son-in-law if he passed the recruitment, so true to his word, he stopped urging her to get married to someone else. "Taking a break is as important as cultivating," Stephen said. "If you have nothing better to do, then come with me to Mariah's factory." Coincidentally, the Ballantine family had ordered a batch of weapons from Mariah that needed to be transported back to the mansion. Vivian agreed since she had nothing planned for the rest of the day. After the Mystic Covenant's recruitment, Mariah announced his retirement to the public. He was one of the most talented blacksmiths around, but he wasn't the only one with this career. His peers were thrilled as orders for weapons returned to their hands. As for his students, they felt it was a waste for someone as talented as their teacher to retire so early. The factory was much quieter now that the public knew that Mariah wasn't in charge anymore. Some of their old customers were ordering from their competitors. Stephen and Vivian found Mariah inspecting the ores in the warehouse. "It's nice to see you, Stephen. Congratulations on passing the recruitment. Are you here for another weapon?" "It's thanks to you. If you didn't refine my sword, I wouldn't have made it." "You're too modest. Your skills are what determine the outcome of a battle, not your weapon." "To be honest, I heard you're retiring. I thought it was a shame, so I came to ask you if you were interested in collaborating with me." Mariah interrupted before Stephen could explain. "Many people have been making the same request ever since I announced my retirement. I rejected them, and I'll have to reject you too. I passed on everything I know to my students. This factory is theirs now. They have a bright future ahead of them, and I'm confident they'll be successful." Stephen understood Mariah's concern. If he partnered with an outsider, there was a risk they would try to exert control or take over his factory. He wanted to leave the decision-making to his students. "Your students are talented, but many of your customers have chosen to purchase weapons from your competitors now that you're retiring. The decrease in orders is obvious. There are piles of raw materials, like ores and crystals, in the warehouse. It would be a waste to leave them in the dust. I'd like to cooperate with you as a franchise. I won't interfere with your factory. I just want to purchase some of your resources and use your name to promote my business. If your students are ever faced with a request that's hard to refuse, they can tell the customer that I'm the person in charge, and I'll take care of it." Mariah was moved by his offer. The factory would be left to his students with no external interference. Their extra resources wouldn't go to waste, and there was someone to take charge when the situation called for it. More importantly, there were no consequences. "Do you have any experience in managing a weapons factory?" "Before I ascended, I was a leader of a country in the human realm, so it's only natural that I have experience." Mariah didn't know much about the human realm, but he believed that Stephen and Vivian wouldn't try to trick him. "Okay, it's a deal. You'll become the honorary director of my factory, but my students will be in charge of daily operations and have the final say. Let's sign a contract when it's ready." The situation was progressing according to the prophet's divination. Stephen didn't have any influence or business connections in the Elysian realm. It'd be hard to purchase ores and crystals. His problem was solved with Mariah's factory. "There will be a celebration next week for my retirement," Mariah said. "You're the director now, so you'll have to attend. It's a lot of pressure. I hope you're mentally prepared." "Don't worry, I'll handle it." When Stephen left the warehouse, the token in his pocket buzzed. He took it out and saw Yvonne on the metallic surface. He waved his hand, and her voice transmitted from the token. "So you do know how to use the token from the Mystic Covenant. It's an encrypted communication device the faction created. I don't know if you've heard, but the issue with the ancient cultivators is getting out of hand. We've been attacking teams who took on the mission to investigate them. Maybe we can work together to resolve the problem. What do you say?" Yvonne had become more fearless in only a week. Stephen didn't know if this was good or a bad development, but he wasn't interested in getting caught up in her troublemaking ways again. "I don't have time. I need to prepare for my first day at the Mystic Covenant." Yvonne rolled her eyes. "I know you're not preparing. What if I tell you this might affect the Ballantine family's business? Are you interested now?" The ancient cultivators had mostly recovered after a short period of recuperation, and they were ready to revitalize their reputation in the Elysian realm by making their presence known. Challenging the guards in the cities and the Mystic Covenant directly was risky. The most likely targets were the wealthy families. "The Ballantine family's business is doing well. There's a high chance they'll become a target. If you're still not interested after hearing all this, then I won't bother you. Just tell Vivian to make her family and mercenaries stay home, and you can go back to preparing in peace." Yvonne didn't just have a talent for getting in trouble and making excuses to get out of the consequences. She was also skilled at roping other people into her shenanigans. Stephen couldn't refuse after hearing the whole story. Even if it wasn't on purpose, he was technically the one who'd released the ancient cultivators. "Let me discuss this with Vivian first. I'll let you know what she says. But even if we decide to go with you, we're just heading out to investigate. We're not fighting them head on." "Okay, got it. See you two later." Yvonne waved goodbye. Stephen put the token back in his pocket and told Vivian the bad news. The Mystic Covenant and the ancient cultivators seemed to have a temporary, unspoken understanding of each other. As long as both sides didn't provoke each other, they wouldn't need to fight to the death. But the mercenaries who took on missions across the realm were caught in the middle. They were the prime targets for the ancient cultivators, and the risk was even higher for private missions. "I've signed a contract with the client. I can't withdraw halfway. Reputation is important to my family's business." A group of elite mercenaries from the Ballantine family were on their way to the mountain to pick up a batch of precious herbs. The specific location was less than 300 miles from Minori City, but the roads were hard to travel. The mercenaries had set off in the afternoon, but they couldn't have gotten that far. If Vivian intervened, they would make it back to the foot of the mountain in the evening. "Don't be nervous," Stephen said. "Yvonne likes to exaggerate. The ancient cultivators aren't targeting your family specifically. Their attacks are random, but there is a risk that your mercenaries will run into them. If that happens, they'll be killed." Vivian debated her options and decided that it wouldn't be worth it to risk the mercenaries' lives. She took out her phone and sent them a message, instructing them to leave the goods behind and run if they encountered any aggressive cultivators. There was an herb plantation over 1,000 acres near the mountain. A pharmaceutical merchant family had been managing the plantation for generations. The herbs were used to refine high-grade cultivation pills. At this time, the ancient cultivators were overlooking the plantation on a cliff in the distance. The Mystic Covenant mistakenly assumed that all of the ancient cultivators had escaped the holy ruins, so they didn't bother wasting their time on repairing the defensive array. In reality, they still had companions hibernating in the ruins, and they were determined to wake them up and get them out. The abandoned mining tunnel leading to the cave in the mountain had become a convenient entrance and exit. "Those herbs are high quality. They'll be useful to refine recovery pills." "The staff aren't that strong. We can kill them, sneak in, and steal the herbs. No one will notice until nighttime." "If we kill them, who will manage the plantation? There are defensive arrays and explosive ores buried underground. The fields will be ruined if we start a fight. We need their herbs, and one batch isn't enough." Stephen and Vivian went to the city gate to wait for Yvonne. She came bounding down the street 5 minutes later. From her carefree and relaxed demeanor, she didn't look like someone about to investigate a group of dangerous ancient cultivators that even the Mystic Covenant couldn't handle. "Tell us your plan," Stephen said. "Knowing you, there's probably a lot of risks involved. It's better if we know about them beforehand." Yvonne scoffed. "Those don't sound like the words of a brave soul who's survived 3 rounds of the Mystic Covenant's recruitment." "I'm just being realistic. There's a difference between courage and recklessness. We can't handle those ancient cultivators on our own." Yvonne ignored his comment. She brought 2 fingers to her lips and whistled. A flock of tiny hummingbirds landed on her shoulder. They were as small as bees. Most people didn't notice them when they flew by because they were so fast. "There are thousands of these birds hiding on the mountain. They can help us find traces of the ancient cultivators." 3 hours later, they arrived at the foot of the mountain. Just as they stepped out of the car, the Ballantine family's mercenaries came running. When they received Vivian's message, they'd already picked up the crates of herbs from the plantation and were taking a shortcut through the mountain. On their way down, they were ambushed. They followed Vivian's instructions and abandoned the goods. Vivian was relieved that her mercenaries were safe, but she was disappointed that the mission was a failure. There's a tracking device in the crates. If we follow its location, we might find the thieves. The mercenaries hastily tried to talk her out of it. It's too risky. You're the backbone of the family. We can't let anything happen to you. Stephen agreed with them. The Ballantine family weren't the only ones who'd been attacked. It would be safer and more efficient to carry out a joint investigation. Investigating alone wouldn't get them anywhere. Yvonne couldn't accept the anticlimactic end to their investigation. It was over before it even started. With the tracking device and her hummingbirds, she was confident they wouldn't be able to track down the ancient cultivators on the mountain. Stephen didn't hesitate to shoot down her suggestion. He couldn't help but wonder where she got her courage from. If they targeted the crates, that means they knew what was inside. They're after the herbs, and they definitely know about the plantation too. They haven't killed anyone or stolen from the plantation directly. Don't provoke them unless you want to be the next target. Vivian wasn't in the mood to investigate. I'm going back to the city to deal with the aftermath. If you two want to investigate, do it alone. She and the mercenaries climbed into the car, preparing to return to the city empty-handed. Stephen and Yvonne were left behind. Ready to give up yet? Stephen asked, watching the car disappear down the road. We're no match for ancient cultivators. Why don't we ask your teacher and the other elders for help? It's not that simple. This place is far away from the city, and the higher-ups don't want to engage in a direct confrontation if it's not necessary. In the end, Yvonne didn't give up. She dragged Stephen around the mountain to take a detour to the plantation to visit the owner. Maybe he had the answers they were looking for. Even though it was the middle of the night, the owner wasn't angry by the rude awakening. He hurriedly got dressed and went out to meet the prestigious guests. Yvonne quickly realized that their trip was wasted because the owner couldn't answer a single one of their questions. The thieves didn't target the plantation, and the owner's only priority was to transfer the profits into his superior's accounts with no discrepancies. At dawn, Yvonne and Stephen trudged back to the city empty-handed, just like Vivian and the mercenaries. In the morning, most of the cities near the mountain had heard about the theft. Panic circulated among the merchant families, but only for a short time. The ancient cultivators had stolen enough herbs for the time being, and they weren't planning another heist anytime soon. This minor case was soon forgotten. A week and a half later, everyone's attention was on Mariah's retirement celebration. A crowd of guests went to the factory to show their support. A mountain of expensive gifts was piled up in the warehouse like a treasure vault. Mariah had taken a last-minute picture of Stephen and enlarged it numerous times before hanging it on the most conspicuous outer wall of the factory. A brief introduction was included below. Mariah was taking advantage of his retirement celebration to make Stephen famous. In the future, if there were any issues his students couldn't handle, they could shirk their responsibilities onto their new, capable director. Mariah's family and friends surrounded him and chattered nonstop. I'm so envious of your early retirement. It's not a bad thing to retire young. It's the trend these days. We trust your students. After all, they learned from the best. We've been your longtime customers for years. We'll continue to support you. I hope the new director will give us a favorable deal when we place orders on account of our old friendship. Mariah was retiring, but his identity held immeasurable commercial value. He wasn't limited to forging weapons. He could easily become a consultant for those interested in pursuing the same career. It was in his family and friends' best interest to maintain their friendly relationship. As the topic of conversation shifted to the new director, everyone's gaze fell on Stephen. They couldn't figure out why Mariah had chosen him to manage the factory. Any one of his students would be more suited to the position. He could have also chosen a random heir to a wealthy family to collaborate with. Stephen was a member of the expeditionary team, but so were many other rich and powerful heirs. Working with them would rank in more profits. Stephen and Vivian were wandering the factory with smiles plastered on their faces. It's a good thing you're not that popular, Vivian said. No one's coming to annoy us. Don't forget what you promised Mariah. Now that you're the director, you'll have to attend troublesome celebrations like these in the future. I always keep my promises. My business will soar once I make all the preparations. As the celebration reached its climax, the staff served food and wine on tables outside, and everyone toasted Mariah. The staff carried iron boxes to the yard. They were filled to the brim with exquisite weapons inlaid with energy crystals for amplification. They were lethal and aesthetically appealing. "I designed and forged these weapons," Mariah proudly introduced. "I wanted to take this chance to give back to my family and friends. There's no starting price for the auction. All the money earned today will be donated." It went without saying that none of the guests were short on money. These weapons were Mariah's masterpieces. They wouldn't find the same weapons anywhere else. An intense auction erupted. 800,000, 5 million, 12 million, 30 million. The guests all shouted kinds of astronomical amounts. Stephen calculated their equivalents in his head. Purple gold coins were more valuable than any currency in the human realm. He didn't know if the United States' factories would be able to produce weapons and equipment as valuable as Mariah's. A few CEOs who didn't participate in the auction went up to Stephen and gave him a handful of intricate business cards. He was nothing like Mariah, but that didn't change the fact that he was the director. Getting close to him would be good for their businesses. There were some guests who weren't thrilled with Stephen's position, like the Bowen family in the Sky domain and the Sheridan family in the Haven domain. They couldn't confront him in public, and they couldn't scheme against him in secret. They could only glare at him when his back was turned. The day flew by, and soon it was time for the guests to leave. The staff cleaned the yard and took the tables away, leaving no trace of the lively celebration behind. Mariah took Stephen and Vivian to the director's office. It was a luxurious study. "My students will be responsible for taking care of the orders like usual. You can do whatever you want as long as it doesn't affect the factory. Feel free to use the resources in the warehouse. Remember to pay the deposit on the spot." Stephen nodded. "I understand. I'll follow the terms listed in the contract." As Stephen and Vivian left the factory, they saw two familiar faces across the street. It was the elder, Ren, and his student, Yvonne. The Mystic Covenant was also one of Mariah's longtime customers. They'd sent someone to attend his retirement celebration. Stephen hurried over. "I thought you two left already. Were you waiting for me?" 2 weeks is almost up," Ren pointed out. "Tomorrow's your first day. I'm here to bring you to the faction before then. I know you're busy, and I didn't want to take up your time during the celebration. I have some things to discuss with you on the way there." Stephen had no reason to reject his reasonable request. He glanced at Yvonne. Her arms were crossed, and she had a pout on her face. At the rate she stirred up trouble, he wouldn't be surprised if Ren had reprimanded her during the celebration. Stephen said goodbye to Vivian and followed Ren and Yvonne to their car. On their way to the Haven domain, Ren handed Stephen a roster of the elders in the faction as he drove. "Have you thought about which elder to train under? These are their profiles." Not even 1 minute later, Stephen felt Yvonne's gaze boring into him impatiently. "Why are you reading so intently? What's there to decide? Ren is my teacher. Are you doubting his skills?" It was obvious that Yvonne had a prestigious identity in the faction. If she was entrusted to Ren, that proved his capabilities. Stephen placed the roster on the empty seat next to him. "If it's okay with you, I'd like to be your student." Ren glanced back with a smile. "Sure, this matter is settled then." He didn't care about Stephen's low cultivation. His potential and perception were more important. He was near the bottom of the list when he compared to the other participants, but he managed to pass all 3 rounds without sustaining any serious injuries. He was experienced and made full use of his techniques and the environment to pass each round flawlessly. "Are we going to the faction to cultivate?" Stephen asked in anticipation. Ren flashed him with a mysterious smile in the rearview mirror. "I remember you were curious about the negotiations between the Asura King and the higher-ups. Their agreement was exactly like what I predicted. The Asura King will be heading to the Asura realm soon. The faction is sending me as their representative. You're well connected there. I have to bring you with me." Stephen's enthusiasm fell. He could already imagine the tension between Killian and the Asura King. He wasn't looking forward to getting caught in the middle of all of that. "Every realm follows the law of the jungle. Aren't you worried you'll get on the Celestial Beast's bad side? He's a unique existence. He retains his memories from previous reincarnations. He'll remember this grudge forever." "There's nothing I can do. Orders are orders. Hopefully he'll at least hear me out with you around." The Mystic Covenant's office building was located at the center of the Haven domain. The dormitories were more luxurious than the VIP rooms at the hotels. Only the faction leader, elders, sentry guards, and the members who'd resigned their duties had that freedom to live elsewhere. They usually lived in mansions in quiet places like the mountains. Stephen had been taken to the faction in a hurry, and he didn't have time to prepare even the most basic luggage. At least he still had some funds left on his bank card. Ren led him to his room when they arrived. "Rest early. We'll be leaving tomorrow afternoon." "Why so soon?" "The Asura King is in a rush to find a place for his people to stay. Don't provoke them tomorrow. They wouldn't attack the celestial beast without a reason, but you're different. They'll kill you the first chance they get." Because of the abrupt mission, Stephen had missed the welcome ceremony for the new members joining the expeditionary team. The elders selected the new students from the 29 members. As the Prophet's second student, Liam was a popular choice. Before Mariah's retirement celebration, Stephen had taken him back to the Elysian realm and brought him a phone to keep in touch. As the 29 members began to train under their respective elders, they caught wind of Stephen's new position at Mariah's factory. They weren't too envious, because if a cultivator was too focused on worldly affairs, they wouldn't have enough time to train. In the afternoon, 2 horses pulling ancient carriages pranced into the sky. Ren, Yvonne, and Stephen were in one, while 2 high-ranking sentry guards from the Mystic Covenant were in the other. The 2 of them had a high status in the faction. They'd participated in the negotiations alongside the higher-ups with the Asura King. With a slight shake of the bells hanging from the horse's neck, a spatial rift appeared in the sky. It was a clean, smooth tear between dimensions. There was no excess energy fraying the edges. It was much more stable compared to the rift Stephen opened with the bone blade. While they were traveling through the spatial tunnel to the Asura realm, Ren took the opportunity to teach Stephen a technique. "I can sense a flame inside you. You have a deep understanding of fire, metal, and earth elements. Out of every element in nature, fire is the most explosive. Water is high fluidity, metal has high penetration, earth has high defenses, and wood has high vitality. Cultivators who master every element have a comprehensive understanding of their integration. But for a beginner like you have a long way to go. Take me to your internal world." Ren separated his spiritual energy from his body and followed Stephen's lead to the world he created inside of him. The cities had developed into a metropolis, and the population had soared to an astonishing number. "I assume this is a projection of the world you live in," Ren said. "The human realm is weak, but it looks like an interesting place." "You don't know what it's like? Aren't there quite a few cultivators in the Elysian realm from the human realm?" Stephen asked. "There aren't that many left now. There were more ascenders in the human realm back then. They built ancient versions of these cities, and everyone else who came after them improved their design. That's why our 2 worlds are so similar." The temple nearby sensed the creator of the world's presence. It alerted the descendants of the priest Stephen had spoken to during the first few visits. The priests of this era had a certain level of cultivation. They hurried over and knelt in front of him. The last time Stephen was here, he'd predicted a war would break out soon, but he didn't know how many years had passed since then. According to the priests, a large-scale invasion by the beasts had taken place 700 years ago. They destroyed cities and killed off half the population. The humans were forced to mix herbs together to concoct poisons. They smeared the poisons on the dead bodies, which in turn killed the beasts that ingested them. In the current era, humans and beasts live separately and rarely came in contact with each other. Ren took Stephen to a mountain peak and condensed flames of different colors. "Fire has many uses. Take these, for example. The purple flame contains poison, the black flame contains acid, the white flame is for healing." The list went on. In some areas of the Elysian realm, these flames existed naturally. Cultivators placed them inside their bodies and used them in battle. "These flames deviate from the laws of nature I'm used to. How do I create them?" Stephen asked. "Your comprehension is a bit lacking, but to put it simply, all objects in the natural world are fused together by a combination of basic elements. Their attributes are ever-changing. They can't always be seen by the naked eye, but they're always there. You have to comprehend beyond the surface of understanding. A single entity isn't meant to be harmonious. There are different forms they can take." To demonstrate, Ren merged the flames into one. It shone 7 colors at a time. When Stephen condensed a ball of fire using the Killin's spiritual energy, Ren's flame swallowed it whole. "Is that all you can do? Create a shield and try to block my fire." Stephen used the Ice Dragon's spiritual energy and condensed a barrier of ice. The 7-colored flame transformed into a spear. It pierced the ice and impaled his chest. Pain flared in his meridians. This will hurt a bit, but my 7-colored flame will temper and reforge your body. I've left a fire seed inside you, Ren said after the flames in Stephen's meridians subsided. When you condense fire in the future, you'll have access to multiple attributes. It'll also help you comprehend the other elements. Stephen expressed his gratitude. Ever since he ascended, there was no one around to give him proper guidance. With Ren as his teacher, he would at least have some sort of direction while cultivating. Yvonne was impressed with Stephen returning from his internal world. It hasn't even been an hour. You're really talented. What did you learn? Mr. Ren taught me how to use a 7-colored flame. He also upgraded my body. Yvonne nodded approvingly. Not bad. When I'm cooking in the wilderness next time, you can help me start a fire with your 7-colored flame. I bet the meat will taste 10 times better. Ren shook his head with a heavy sigh. He'd been trying to teach Yvonne his techniques, but she never took her training seriously. If it weren't for his identity, his title as an elder, and protection from his other students, she would have died many times over. Stephen has potential, and he's hardworking. Don't influence him with your laziness. My reputation has taken a hit ever since you became my student. Yvonne scoffed. What I'm hearing is, you two don't have a sense of humor. As the carriage passed through the spatial tunnel, stars glittered in the background like the night sky. 10 minutes later, they arrived at the Asura realm. Stephen had been there not too long ago, so he was familiar with the scenery, but that wasn't the case for the others. They looked around in confusion. The buildings were similar to the human and Elysian realms. It was hard to believe that the wild and unruly beasts lived in such a civilized way. A black shadow streaked across the sky like a meteor and landed in the empty space next to the carriages. The man was dressed in gray and wore a ruby mask. Stephen couldn't sense his aura. If the man was standing right in front of him, he wouldn't have known he was there. The 2 sentry guards from the Mystic Covenant greeted him with a smile. The man with no aura was the Asura King. The guards glanced at Stephen, signaling with their eyes for him to lead the way. Killian was waiting for them at the entrance of the city at the foot of the Myriad Mountains. A dense crowd of beasts in their real forms towered over him. Even though Killian's aura was perfectly concealed and he was much smaller in comparison, the beast's surging auras couldn't undermine his presence. Their collective auras washed over Stephen and the others like a tsunami. The pressure was indescribable. Ever since Killian heard about the negotiations between the Mystic Covenant and the Asura King, he'd rationally analyzed the upcoming confrontation and concluded that having another war wasn't the best idea. It'd be better to find somewhere for the Asuras to stay, so he could keep an eye on them. At the first sign of rebellion, he wouldn't hesitate to strike them down. Killian greeted them with practiced friendliness. One of the beasts behind him brought over a stone table, chair, and fruits. The message behind their simple reception was glaring. The celestial beast was the ruler of the realm, and outsiders weren't welcome. It was a clear provocation, one that didn't go unnoticed. The Asura King created this realm, but it had been taken over by a pack of animals. This fact alone disgusted him. The Mystic Covenant's guards intervened before the tension could escalate. We're all old acquaintances. These formalities aren't necessary. Let's sit down and talk. Everyone took their seats. The horde of beasts sat down on the ground behind Killian, glaring at the Asura King, who wasn't fazed in the least. The Asura King impatiently put forward his request for his people to return to the realm. The 2 guards supported him. Killian had already heard the story from Stephen, so he wasn't surprised. He took out a map with a smile on his face and pointed at the circled area. There's extra land next to the Myriad Mountains. Basic facilities have been set up. Your people can move in whenever they're ready. Let's live in peace. Everyone exchanged glances, not understanding why the discussion was progressing so smoothly. They hadn't even begun to negotiate. The Asura King had a comprehensive understanding of his own realm, but he didn't know what was so special about this particular area. Is there anything else you'd like to discuss? Killian asked. The guards carried wooden boxes with intricate carvings to the table. The Mystic Covenant has prepared gifts for you. They opened the lid, revealing exquisite weapons inside. One look and Stephen could tell that these were Mariah's handiwork. Killian continued to smile, but he didn't have much of a reaction to the weapons. The Mystic Covenant and the Asuras are welcome any time. It's rare for us to have visitors. I've prepared an event to lighten the atmosphere. The ground shook violently. Cracks tore through the rocky terrain, and an arena rose to the surface. The outer circle was engraved with complex arrays. A wave of dizziness washed over Stephen with one glance at the diagrams. It was a familiar feeling. He'd experienced the same dizziness when he fought with the exorcists. Killian stood up and gave a passionate announcement. The beasts and the Asuras have had many conflicts in the past, but we, the commanders, have had yet to face each other. It's a bit regrettable, so I prepared this stage for us. You know what they say, if you don't fight, you won't get closer. This is our chance to bring harmony to our two species. The Asura king couldn't refuse. His dignity and reputation were on the line. A muffled laugh sounded from behind his mask. Your proposal is an interesting one. We've had many experienced spectators in the crowd today. Let's have them judge the victor. The two of them leaped into the ring at the same time. Their energy flowed wildly out of them around the arena. Arrays from exorcists were not to be trifled with. There was a time limit to the battle. If they exhausted too much of their energy, it would result in internal injuries. With a single thought in Killian's mind, an army of thousands of beasts appeared beside him. Their auras surged around the Asura king and attacked. Before their sharp claws and fangs could reach him, he threw out a fist, and the beasts in the vicinity burst like a balloon. The warm-up ended quickly. Killian condensed a blade forged to the bones of the beasts, and the Asura king materialized a sword. Stephen's eyes were glued to the arena, but he couldn't catch their movements. They moved so fast that the sound of collisions came seconds after the action was carried out. He'd reached out with his aura to sense their exact positions, but a backlash made him reel. The sensation of 1,000 needles piercing his mind overwhelmed him. This is beyond your cultivation, Ren advised. You've already proven your skill by staying seated. If it were anyone else, they would have been thrown into the air from the pressure. The Celestial Beast and the Asura King are far from ordinary experiences. Being present during their confrontation is good enough. Stephen summoned the iridescent dragon. Its skills came in handy at times like these. A bubble enveloped him, isolating him from the pressure and increasing his mental energy. The battle in the arena came into view. Killian and the Asura King fought in the simplest of martial arts, punches and kicks. They were so simple that anyone could imitate them, but the force they contained couldn't be replicated. A single punch packed enough force to crush a mountain. They both relied on their bodies' high defenses to take head-on hits. Neither of them stepped back or dodged. Are they going to fight until one of them can't handle it anymore? Stephen asked. No, the Celestial Beast's body is a shell. His existence is contained inside. He's illusory, like a phantom. He's an abstract entity formed by an accumulation of murderous intent from the beasts, so he doesn't have internal organs. He can absorb the power of the beasts in the Asura realm. The more there are, the more powerful he'll be. The Asura King is fighting alone. If his people were here, he would have been able to draw power from their faith, but not now. To maintain the peace, neither Killian nor the Asura King could lose the match. The Mystic Covenant had to step in at the right time. Stephen was a new member. This troublesome task wasn't his responsibility. Killian's fist left behind shadowy afterimages. They merged and turned into a python, coiling around the Asura King's skin. When he moved to break free, he found a horde of ants crawling up his ankles. He flipped through the air, putting some distance between him and Killian, and released a blood-red mist around him. The corrosive properties melted the ants and sizzled when it came in contact with the floor. With the ants out of the way, the Asura King condensed bones sharper than blades around Killian. They spread throughout the arena and filled the air, leaving no room to dodge. The sharpened tips pointed at Killian and shot forward. The bones had missed their targets, exploding into smaller fragments, which dealt a second round of damage. The Asura King's bone fragments had the same utility as Killian's insects. Their size enabled them to crawl through the softest parts of the body, like the ears, eyes, and nose, and invade the internal organs. A cloud of white powder filled the arena as the bones shattered. Killian was unscathed, but he couldn't see past the powder in the air. He condensed a fish with black scales above the arena. It spurted ink over the ring. The black liquid drenched the Asura King's clothes, accompanied by a foul smell that revealed his location. Killian leaped into the air and condensed a swarm of wasps. Their buzzing echoed across the arena as they laced the sound waves with a mental interference attribute. Stephen was sitting a short distance away from the arena, but he felt like his mind was in a trance. The Asura King's body was unharmed, but the sound was vexing. It grated on his nerves. He manifested a storm that swept up the cloud of white powder and fragments of bone. As the torrential wind spiraled towards the wasps, he pointed his sword at Killian and condensed its aura at the tip. A beam of light pierced the clouds and descended over the arena. Killian condensed a crackling sphere of lightning and threw it at the Asura King's face. The 2 long-range attacks hit their targets point-blank, and a deafening explosion swept the ring. The guards shared a look. Things are getting out of hand. We'll have to take responsibility if either of them sustains severe injuries. They're both gods of warlike species. If we let them fight to the death, the aftermath won't be easy to handle. One of the guards drew his sword and gathered its aura. As the explosion died down, he jumped into the ring and stepped between Killian and the Asura King. Before another explosion could erupt from the residual energy in the air, he cleverly deflected the remainder of their attacks towards the empty clearing around the arena. The uninhabited area suffered an undeserved calamity. Both of your performances were a sight to behold. Let's not waste all of our time in the arena. It's a long journey from the Elysian realm to the Asura realm. My people are getting a little hungry. Why don't we sit down and take a break? Killian couldn't refuse his request. He left the arena with the Asura King, and Briar led everyone to the city for a more suitable location to have a meal. During the forced truce, Stephen sat quietly in the corner, feeling drained and exhausted. Even with the barrier from the iridescent dragon, he'd sustained internal injuries from the aftershocks of the battle. After forcing himself to have a few drinks, Briar came over and led him out of the building. Briar used to be an inconspicuous follower of the celestial beast, but his cultivation had improved at an astonishing rate ever since the war ended. He was almost on par with Liam. "You've improved a lot since the last time I saw you in a fight," Stephen noted. Briar opened the door to the guest room. "This is thanks to Mr. Killian's teachings. Stay here tonight and rest up. You won't be leaving for a while." "What do you mean? My injuries aren't that bad. I should be fine by tomorrow." "Mr. Killian has other arrangements planned. He noticed you weren't feeling well, so he asked me to bring you here, away from the conflict." With no further explanation, Briar excused himself and left. Stephen didn't have the energy to process his words. He closed the door behind him and crawled into bed, falling asleep almost instantly. In the evening, the Asura King and the others from the Mystic Covenant went to the designated piece of land to take a look around. They were dumbfounded by the basic facilities Killian had mentioned. The land was a desert surrounded by a circular construct and turrets built from reinforced concrete. The power of the Asura's weaponry was known to all, and the message conveyed was just as obvious. When the Asuras moved in, Killian could turn them to dust with a single command. The Asura King was infuriated. If it weren't for the fact that he needed to revive the Asuras and absorb power to retain their faith, he would have dropped all pretenses and fought to the death with Killian a long time ago. "What's the meaning of this? Are you watching over my people like they're criminals?" "I only want to provide the Asuras with protection," Killian said matter-of-factly. "It was precisely because your people were too weak that they were kicked out of this realm. They don't have the strength to protect themselves." The 2 sentry guards intervened to smooth things over. "It's a custom for the guests to go along with the host. Bring your tribe to the realm and slowly get used to the environment. Once they get stronger, the turrets can be dismantled." The Asura King was hoping to get the Mystic Covenant on his side to exert pressure on the beasts, but they weren't helpful when it counted. This mess was all because of his disappointing subordinates. At the end of the tour, the Asura King left to bring his people to the realm. They would have to rebuild their tribe from scratch. Ren, Yvonne, and the guards were situated in luxury buildings with lavish accommodations. Early the next morning, Stephen awoke to sunlight streaming through the window. His headache had dulled to an ache, but his muscles were still a little sore. After washing up, Briar came knocking on his door. "How are you doing? Mr. Killian can treat you if you're not feeling well." "I'm fine," Stephen replied, rolling his shoulder to relieve a stiff joint. "Do you know where my team is?" The elder and his student are touring the city, while the 2 guards are having discussions with the beasts. Stephen wasn't surprised. As long as Yvonne was around, no one could get work done. It seemed he was the only one affected by this battle. Yvonne either had a higher mental energy than him, or she practiced a technique that decreased the effects of mental interference. Briar led Stephen to Killian's room and tactfully left, so they could have a private discussion. Killian wasn't too thrilled about the Mystic Covenant's mediator role between the beasts' conflict with the Asuras. Knowledge was power, and he had none. With your cultivation, you're at the bottom of the hierarchy in the Mystic Covenant. Not all of the members are given the opportunity to visit other realms to carry out missions. They have to be skilled and prove their capabilities. Killian waved his hand, and a ripple of healing energy swept over Stephen. His headache and the aches in his joints vanished. He felt lighter and refreshed. If you're waiting for me to gain some authority in the faction, it won't be happening anytime soon. I don't care about that. What I want is the faction's internal affairs. I'll leave a group of beasts by your side. Work together and gather insider information. A gray whirlwind swept the spacious room. 11 beasts appeared next to Killian. They represented the 12 zodiac animals. The rat had the ability to conceal its aura. Along with its small size, it was a valuable asset when gathering information. The golden ox with one horn excelled in competitions of brute force. The saber-toothed tiger's majestic aura was capable of suppressing weaker opponents through intimidation and pressure alone. The rabbit could create a crowd of clones of itself. The snake was familiar to the threadworms, except more powerful. The horse was fast, making it an excellent escape route. The sheep had control over plants. The monkey's intelligence was on par with humans. It was a talented strategist. The rooster had similar abilities to the fire phoenix. It could be reborn from its ashes. The dog had high defenses and could become a living shield. The pig was the most peculiar. It wasn't that strong in combat, but it could recover from almost any injury by consuming its own flesh. As for the last beast, completing the 12 zodiacs, it was the iridescent dragon. As your mounts, they can move freely within the faction, Killian said. They're on your side, but they won't be signing a blood contract with you. Don't blindly rely on them in battle. Think of them as your partners, like the iridescent dragon. There were no downsides to Killian's offer. Stephen agreed and absorbed the zodiac beasts into his spiritual world. He regrouped with Ren, Yvonne, and the 2 guards and boarded the carriages back to the Elysian realm. The guards received a message on their tokens when they arrived. Thieves had stolen from the wealthy families across the realm. Private teams and public missions wouldn't be enough to resolve the case. If the authorities didn't make a move, the issue would escalate and the economy would fail. The city guards aren't doing anything. They're waiting for us to take charge. Well, it's also our duty to get rid of traitors who stand by and do nothing in a crisis. Calm down. We need to prioritize the ancient cultivators. The information in the message wasn't detailed, but the guards could guess who the culprits were. There were traces of the ancient cultivators across the realm. They were clearly showing off their presence. The wealthy families they targeted had sent representatives to the Mystic Covenant's office building to ask for help. If the faction continued to drag out the situation, their reputation would take a hit. The guards didn't have the authority to resolve the issue. They could only wait for the leader of the faction to step in. Stephen and Yvonne's cultivations were low. They weren't allowed to participate in the decision-making. Ren led them through the back door to avoid running into the representatives from the wealthy families. Once they were inside the building, they went their separate ways. Ren headed upstairs to his office, and Stephen went to look for Liam. The 30 new members had their respective elders as their teacher, but they still had to gather together to train on certain days. Stephen found Liam and the other members at the indoor training ground adjacent to the office building. He'd missed the welcoming ceremony yesterday, and when he walked in, everyone turned to stare at him. Liam waved from the corner. The general of the army brings up the rear, Shadow mocked sarcastically. If you're late, you must have had something more important than training to deal with. I heard you took over Mariah's factory. Are you more interested in making money than cultivating? Most of the members were from distinguished families. They knew how important it was for their families to work with Mariah, but Stephen had stolen their business opportunity by becoming the factory's director. He wasn't anyone special. His cultivation was low, and his background was nothing to brag about. The meeting in the Asura realm was confidential, and Stephen wasn't about to break the regulations on his first day. There's nothing wrong with running a business. I'm not breaking any rules. Outsiders like you should stay out of it. Shadow didn't respond. He'd accomplished his goal of painting Stephen in a bad light. The other members didn't have a good impression of him. It would only be a matter of time before he became their target. 10 minutes later, a senior member of the faction walked into the training ground. Everyone listened intently as he explained 2 special techniques. One could protect the mind from mental interference. The other used anger to amplify strength. When he was explaining the precautions, Stephen noticed Yvonne in the back row looking around. She had to attend every training session for new members. This was an order and a threat from Ren. She never took her own training seriously, so the least she could do was stay put during the basics and hopefully learn something after hearing it over and over. All of you have solid foundations, the senior member continued. You've mastered many offensive techniques. The 2 techniques I'll be teaching you today are basic. It won't conflict with the other ones you've already learned. You'll need to master the basics if you want to keep up with the elders' teachings. Stephen heard a not-so-subtle sigh from Yvonne in the back, followed by a complaint muttered under her breath. I don't know why I have to waste my time learning the basics. I'm strong enough to go out on missions with Ren's students. I can even be their team leader. Stephen decided right then and there to keep the unreliable Yvonne in his line of sight at all times. When he was out on a mission, who knew how much trouble she could get herself into when he took his eyes off her? Instead of sneaking out and solving century-old cases, focus on learning the basics, Stephen whispered, glancing at the back row. The elders will give you harder missions once you improve. Yvonne shot him a glare. Are you trying to teach me right now? I might be younger than you, but I'm your senior. Stephen wisely kept quiet. He turned back to the real senior member in the front of the room. The senior member finished explaining the 2 techniques and left, leaving them alone to figure it out on their own. The training ground was equipped with a complete set of facilities. The most eye-catching was the sparring ring. It was much more convenient to spar here than to go out. Shaddle and the Sheridan brothers had teamed up after the recruitment. Even though Stephen had taken over the factory, Mariah's name would continue to hold commercial value for years to come. There was still a chance for the Sheridan brothers to steal the factory from him. As for Shaddle, he needed the Bowen and Ballantine families to become in-laws to expand the family business. Shaddle lowered his voice as he leaned into the Sheridan brothers. I was wondering if he would ever show up. We should do something now that he's here. Like what? Fighting is prohibited in the building, except in the sparring ring, but weapons and killing aren't allowed during a spar. We'll have a spar with him every 3 to 5 days, and we'll make him afraid of us. Without waiting for a reply, Shaddle walked over to Stephen, where he was chatting with Liam and Yvonne. I've heard a lot about your skills. It's a shame we haven't had the chance to spar until now. Want to give it a go? Did you already master those 2 techniques? Comprehension is better during actual combat. Don't you agree? Everyone gathered around the sparring ring as Stephen and Shaddle stepped inside. Cultivating every day was boring. They needed some entertainment in their lives. Shaddle rushed at Stephen like a tiger pouncing on his prey. The 7-colored flame burst to life around Stephen. Its attributes neutralized the impact of Shaddle's fist. You have more of an understanding of the laws of nature than I expected, Shaddle commented. Thank you. Compared to you and the others, my skills are nothing. When Shaddle kicked out, Stephen countered with a hand to his leg. The slit on Stephen's palm parted and began to drain his energy. As they exchanged blows, Shaddle's energy reserves were gradually emptied. It was a slow process, but the spectators could tell who had the advantage. Shaddle's energy had a strong autonomy. Stephen could absorb it, but he couldn't control it. Shaddle gave up on close combat. He stepped back and condensed the aura from his sword at his fingertips. Weapons weren't allowed, but using their power wasn't prohibited. Stephen sidestepped to avoid the sharp blade of light aimed at his neck. With the help of the ghost fire in his sword and the Book of Destiny, he saw through every opening in Shaddle's attacks. To the spectators, Stephen had a talent for dodging at the last minute, while Shaddle's movements were clumsy. Yvonne, who was sitting next to Liam below the ring, clapped her hands and cheered. Did you forget who Stephen's teacher is? He's learning from the Dragon Clan's prophet. Predicting the angle and trajectory of your attacks is a piece of cake for him. You'd better surrender while you still can. The onlookers started whispering. Not all of them knew about Stephen's identity as the prophet's student. His connection with the prophet set him apart from the rest of them. The Mystic Covenant recruited members every 10 years, but Stephen was the first student the prophet had ever taken in.
Stop exaggerating, Yvonne, Stephen chided. Divination takes a long time to master. I can't use it in combat. One of the new members interrupted. Can you divine my future? I want to know if my boyfriend's the one. Please, divine my fortune, a second member shouted. I've been losing my money at casinos lately. You two are asking for useless things, a third member called out. Cultivation is more important. I want to know when I'm going to break through. The 2 techniques the senior member explained earlier were forgotten. Everyone was hoping for Stephen to be their fortune teller. Shaddle had been missing every move. If he kept going like this, he would make a fool of himself. Luckily, he had an excuse to end the spar. It looks like you're busy. Let's end our spar here. Stephen agreed. He wasn't interested in the spar in the first place. The moment he stepped out of the ring, the other members surrounded him. Even an elder like Wren wanted to take advantage of Stephen's connection with the prophet. It went without saying that the new members would be beyond enthusiastic. Seeing that Stephen was at a loss of what to do, Yvonne ran over to help him out of the mess she'd caused. "Aren't you all afraid of peeking into the secrets of the heavens? Knowing too much won't do you any good. Besides, if Stephen was able to use his divination ability whenever he wanted, all of our casinos in our realm would have closed down already. Instead of relying on divinations, focus on your cultivation." While the members were rendered speechless by her lecture, she ushered Stephen out of the room. Liam followed them out. The Mystic Covenant didn't impose that many restrictions on new members of the expeditionary team. They had the freedom to leave and come back whenever they wanted. Their only task was to cultivate and be strong enough to take on missions. "You're using me as an excuse to go out and play, aren't you?" Stephen asked suspiciously as the three of them left the training ground. "Mr. Wren has high expectations of you. Don't you want to improve your cultivation?" "Why are you so old-fashioned? Cultivating is boring. We need to enjoy our youth. If you don't want to come, then I'll go alone." Stephen and Liam looked at each other before falling into step behind her. The last thing Stephen wanted to do was divine futures for the rest of the day. Now he understood how much trouble he'd caused when the prophet first opened his store. The ability to see the future was highly sought after by the masses. More importantly, every time Yvonne stepped past the faction's doors, a new crisis soon followed. She was like a magnet for trouble. Yvonne took them to the tea house near the faction. This was where she usually killed time. The pastries were sweet and delicious, and she couldn't stop coming back. The chef came over to their table by the window in the attic. Yvonne was a frequent customer, and they'd known each other for a long time. She ordered a long list of items from the menu. "Can you eat all of that?" the chef asked in amusement. Yvonne gestured to Stephen and Liam. "I have 2 friends to share them with today." The chef laughed. "If you like my pastries so much, you should get those elders to let me open up a branch at the faction." "I've been trying, but Wren is too stubborn. I can't get through to him. He says I'll spend all my time eating pastries if you open a store in the building." Stephen caught Liam's gaze from across the table. They were both thinking the same thing. Knowing Yvonne, Wren was probably right. After the pastries and drinks were served, Yvonne noticed that she and Liam were the only ones eating. Stephen was looking out the window at the passerbys below. "You're scaring everyone away from the store with that frown on your face." Stephen rolled his eyes. "I'm thinking about the ancient cultivators." "What do they have to do with you? Just wait for the Mystic Covenant to take charge and deal with them." Liam pushed the plate of tarts towards Yvonne. "Focus on what's in front of you. Mr. Adams has responsibilities that you don't." The ancient cultivators were expanding their targets, and many businesses had been affected. Stephen had recently taken over Mariah's factory. He was responsible for his students. If the ancient cultivators attacked, not only would they not make it out alive, their business would be ruined. Stephen spotted a girl with pink hair on the streets below. She looked up, briefly meeting his gaze before entering the tea house. A few minutes later, she showed up at the attic and took a seat next to him. It was the iridescent dragon in human form. The 11 zodiac beasts Killian had introduced to him were similar to the iridescent dragon. They disappeared for extended periods of time without a word and acted independently. "The ancient cultivators are targeting herbs, ores, and crystals. It looks like they're preparing for war," the iridescent dragon reported. Stephen's concerns became a reality. "Did they show up near the factory?" "The other zodiac beasts are keeping watch. They couldn't find traces of the ancient cultivators, but they've been sensing a vague presence around the factory." "Okay, let's head over." Yvonne grabbed Stephen and Liam's arms when they stood up to leave. "Do you two want to die? Do you really think you can stop the ancient cultivators on your own?" "Now you're worried about the ancient cultivators?" Stephen asked over his shoulder. "You know the Mystic Covenant is stalling. Mariah will be devastated if anything happens to his students and his life's work. I can't stop them, but I need to warn Mariah's students and check up on the factory." The ancient cultivators were on the mountain, brewing herbs around a bonfire. Many of their companions were still in the holy ruins, hibernating to recover from injuries they'd sustained thousands of years ago. "What if this doesn't work? We don't know how serious their injuries are." "There's nothing to worry about. Our bodies are technically immortal. We can wait as long as we need to." "When are we going to attack the Mystic Covenant? Most of us have recovered to our peak condition." We're heavily outnumbered. They have too many people, and they have the authority over the city guards. Then what should we do? Should we establish our own faction and train an army to fight them? That's not something we can accomplish in a day. It's too time-consuming. We have time to wait, but not that long. Do you remember that cultivator we ran into outside the cave? His name is Stephen Adams, and he recently joined the expeditionary team. He also took over the blacksmith's factory. From what I hear, he runs a large business in the human realm. If we get him on our side, we'll have unlimited amounts of weapons and equipment to attack the cities and the Mystic Covenant. Stephen and Liam pushed open the doors to the factory, and a wave of heat swept over them. One of Mariah's students came over to greet them. "Do you have a new order for us, Mr. Adams? Would you like me to call the others over?" "No, I have something to talk to you about. Follow me." The three of them headed to the director's office. Stephen informed Mariah's students about the thieves and recent robberies. Their next target could be this factory. "Should we tell my teacher about this?" Mariah's student suggested. "He has connections. He might be able to find the people to protect the factory." "They're not like other thieves. For now, reduce the quantity of resources and transport them to our backup warehouse. If we're robbed, we won't have too many losses." By the time they finished transporting the resources, the sun was setting. Stephen asked Mariah's students to leave the factory. "No matter what happens, don't come back. Wait until the danger passes." "Thank you, Mr. Adams. Take care of yourself." Mariah's students left in a hurry, and silence returned to the factory. The sun had set, but the blazing flames of the furnace could be seen for miles. If the ancient cultivators were targeting the factory, it wouldn't be hard for them to find it. The Zodiac rat and snake had created clones of themselves to monitor the forest. There were nothing more Stephen and Liam could do except hope that the ancient cultivators weren't interested in targeting the factory. As they were leaving, the iridescent dragon sensed something amiss. Its perception was sharper than most people. The animals and beasts around the factory were quieter than usual, as if a threat had entered the forest. The iridescent dragon urged them to walk faster. "Get a move on. You like to pretend you're rich and powerful, but wealthy entrepreneurs don't put themselves in danger like you do. If push comes to shove, the Zodiac beasts won't be there to protect you." Before Stephen could respond, a fire gushed out of the factory's chimney, and two figures covered in flames landed behind them. "Are you two here alone? Did you think you were enough to take us down?" Stephen and Liam whirled around. The ancient cultivators had sneaked up behind them without them knowing. They would have been dead if they attacked right away. The ancient cultivators dispersed the flames around them, revealing their true appearance. They looked different from when they were in the ruins. They resembled ordinary humans with no aura. The ancient cultivators ignored Liam and looked at Stephen. "Don't be nervous. We came to talk to you. You see, we're in dire need of herbs, ores, crystals, and weapons. We heard your factory in the human realm has what we're looking for." "You want to challenge the Mystic Covenant? They're the highest order in the realm. What makes you think you can win?" The ancient cultivator's expressions turned sinister. "Whether it's a martial arts faction or a country, we'll kill anyone who tries to stop us. Now give us your answer. Will you become our ally or our enemy?" Stephen glanced at Liam. Mariah's factory was located on the outskirts of the Haven domain. Even if they called for help, they would be dead before reinforcements arrived. "What if I refuse?" "If we're allies, after we ruin the Mystic Covenant and take over the Elysian realm, we'll give you part of our territory. But you don't really have a choice. If you don't agree, we'll open a spatial rift and cross over to the human realm. We'll destroy your country and kill your friends and family. Either way, we'll be getting what we want. But the question is, do you want to do this the easy way or the hard way?" Stephen could never give in to the threats that involved putting the people he cared about in danger. He closed the distance in the blink of an eye and aimed for their necks with his sword. The ancient cultivator on the left caught the blade with his bare hand, holding it firmly in place. "As a human, you should know your limits. Whether you die now or later doesn't make a difference. Your family and friends will meet the same fate soon." "I'm not going to let you get your way." Stephen infused his sword with the lightning he'd absorbed during his heavenly trial. The laws of the heavens contain power that far surpassed the limits of humans. The ancient cultivator didn't see it coming. The lightning struck him square in the chest, sending him flying across the clearing. Electricity flared, forcing his companion to retreat into the forest to avoid being electrocuted. Stephen and Liam took advantage of their distraction to circulate their speed to the maximum and run in the opposite direction towards the city. Before they could get too far, the pressure in the air increased and weighed down their limbs. They were as heavy as lead. The ancient cultivator who wasn't hit by the heavenly lightning caught up to them. "Where are you going? We're not done yet." A flurry of punches struck Stephen from all sides. In his eyes, the ancient cultivators hadn't moved an inch. His movements were so fast that he couldn't keep up. An unseen force slammed Stephen into the ground, followed by another directly into his abdomen. An all-consuming agony tore through him, and his world went black. At the last minute, Liam condensed his wooden totems around Stephen, but they couldn't absorb the entire impact before shattering into splinters. The ancient cultivator who'd been struck by heavenly lightning joined his companion. "Struggling is pointless. We'll give you some time to decide. Think it over carefully before our next meeting." They stepped into the forest and disappeared. The pressure in the air returned to normal. Liam hurried over to Stephen's prone form. He couldn't tell how many bones had been broken or how serious the damage to Stephen's internal organs were, but his ragged breathing and concerning amount of blood told him that it wasn't a light injury. They were in the middle of nowhere, and Liam couldn't just leave Stephen in the wilderness with beasts lurking in the shadows. The ancient cultivators had made their threat clear. They wouldn't be coming back for the rest of the night. Liam lifted Stephen off the ground, careful not to jostle his wounds, and carried him towards the factory. With every cough, Stephen's blood dyed his shirt a darker shade of crimson, and his life force dimmed a little more. Liam quickened his pace. When they were safely inside the director's office, Liam gave Stephen a few medicinal pills and dressed his wounds. As he set the rolls of gauze and bandages aside, the iridescent dragon flew off his shoulders and settled on the couch beside Stephen, where he was lying on his side. "Why are you the only one here?" Liam asked, pulling the curtains closed. The ice dragon and the threadworms were cultivating at the dragon clan's castle. Aside from the iridescent dragon, the other zodiac beasts were nowhere to be seen during the conflict. "Where are the zodiac beasts? Didn't Killian introduce them to Mr. Adams to prepare for these exact situations?" "I warned you beforehand. You can't rely on them in battle. The celestial beast didn't lie. Beasts have instinctual fear of superior beings. If the celestial beast isn't here, and they haven't formed a blood contract to override their instincts, there's nothing they can do. Those ancient cultivators can kill us with one hand." Stephen brushed the iridescent dragon's scales with the back of his hand. "Stop arguing. I'll live." Liam had more to say, but he kept quiet and busied himself with searching the office for anything useful. The iridescent dragon did the same and laid down, curling next to Stephen. Stephen slept until morning. He woke up to a throbbing headache and a high fever. Liam hovered over to him in concern as he swung his legs over the couch and crossed the room to the closet. "Mr. Adams, why are you pushing yourself? The ancient cultivators won't be back for at least a day." "I'm worried about the human realm. They used to be the Mystic Covenant's subordinates. I need to get the elders to take action." "The faction already knows about them, but they chose not to do anything. Will they change their minds for you?" "They're delaying the inevitable. If they don't do something about the ancient cultivators now, the Elysian realm will also be at risk. It's only a matter of time before the elders are forced to make a move. I need to speed things up and get them to stop stalling." Mariah hadn't had time to clean the closet in the director's office. Stephen and Liam changed into a clean set of clothes before making their journey to the car. As Liam drove, Stephen stared out the window at the endless wilderness. The steady hum of the car's engine and the unchanging scenery made him drowsy. Exhaustion and pain crept into his bones, and he found it harder and harder to stay awake. The next time he opened his eyes, Liam was shaking his shoulder. They'd arrived at the Mystic Covenant's headquarters, and from the concern on Liam's face, it seemed like he'd been trying to wake him up for a while. As Stephen and Liam headed upstairs to Wren's office, the new members who were diligently training cast them disdainful looks. Ever since they joined the faction, they'd been skipping training lessons. The new members rarely saw them in the building. Wren was leisurely sipping tea and chatting with the two other elders, Tyrek and Tracy, in his office. They looked up when they heard a knock at the door. Stephen walked into the room with Liam behind him. "What happened?" Wren asked, concerned by his pale complexion. Stephen sat down on the couch by the door, breathless from the flights of stairs. Liam stood next to him as he explained the ancient cultivators' attack at Mariah's factory last night, and their threat against the human realm. Before they betrayed the faction, they'd carried out missions across the 6 realms. There was a high chance they had an alternative method to freely travel between realms. We've informed the faction leader about the ancient cultivators, but he hasn't given us any clear direction, Tyrek said. Are you going to keep stalling for time? I'm not going to sacrifice the human realm for temporary peace in this realm. You know they're after weapons and equipment, and the human realm can provide them with what they need. The two elders were stunned by Stephen's blatant threat. Tracy's eyes narrowed. You've only been with us for a few days, and you're already threatening us? Are you not aware of the rules and regulations? Don't you have any loyalty to your own faction? We and the Asura realm are allies, Stephen warned. Are you confident you can win a fight with no casualties against humans, beasts, and a god? The two elders were at a loss for words. In the middle of the tense silence, Ren stood up and walked over to the couch. He placed his hand on Stephen's forehead and frowned. I warned you to be careful, Ren said disapprovingly, giving Stephen a medicinal pill before turning back to the other elders. I'll lead a squad from the expeditionary team and investigate the exact situation within 24 hours before making our move. Tracy tried to dissuade him. Isn't that a bit hasty? We're out in the open while the enemy is in the dark. They can easily turn the tables on us. She and Tyrek were hesitant to wage a war. The Elysian realm was peaceful, and it had been for a long time since they'd fought. But Ren was Stephen's teacher. It was reasonable for him to stand up for his student. If he insisted on taking charge, then, as fellow elders, they would have to go along with it. Tell the city guards to prepare and call for reinforcements, Ren instructed. My other students are out on a mission. I'll call them back and ask them to head to the human realm with Stephen. They'll be back within 3 hours. Tyrek and Tracy had no choice but to do as he said. As their discussion droned on, Stephen had a hard time following their conversation. The room was spinning, and the air was stifling. He had to lie down to keep the nausea at bay. Ren had promised to send assistance to the human realm, and that was enough for him. It had to be enough, because he didn't have it in him to negotiate again. Voices faded in and out. Stephen felt someone sink into the seat beside him and sensed Liam and the iridescent dragon, whom he hadn't seen all morning. Another hand was pressed against his forehead. It was colder and more familiar than Ren's. A wave of icy energy flooded his veins, dousing the heat and washing away the nausea. Suddenly, it was easier to breathe. Before he drifted off, he sensed the ice dragon and the threadworm's presence in the room. When Stephen woke up, he was in a carriage, traveling through a spatial tunnel. He sat up in a daze and saw Liam next to him with two unfamiliar young men on either side. They introduced themselves as Emmett and Seth. Among Ren's students, they were the strongest, and they'd been tasked with the responsibility to help Stephen in the human realm. The appearance of a black hole in the heavily guarded training ground on the outskirts of Annapolis alarmed the Leviathan unit. They unsheathed their weapons and cautiously surrounded the black hole, bracing themselves for another invasion. A horse pulling a carriage emerged from the rift, and Stephen quickly got out first to calm the Leviathan unit down. Wait, it's not another invasion. These are my acquaintances. The Leviathan unit was glad to see the Sovereign return unharmed. The world was at peace, so the military had relaxed their guard. Most of the higher-ups at the military administration building were on vacation. Emmett and Seth stepped out of the carriage and admired the view. Humans are known to be weak. How did they come up with such a magnificent civilization? Everything in nature is balanced. Humans aren't the strongest cultivators out there. They're weak individually, but when they band together, it would be a mistake to underestimate them. The two of them released their auras across the entire city as they took in the breathtaking scenery. If it weren't for the impending crisis, they wouldn't mind settling down in the human realm. The Leviathan unit's leader, Thierry, Tristan, and Zane, four of the strongest martial artists in the country, rushed to the training grounds as fast as they could. The auras they sensed just now were much stronger than Stephen's. They assumed he'd been taken hostage by an enemy. They were relieved to find that that wasn't the case, but their concern returned when they sensed his serious internal injuries. The Leviathan unit's leader offered to check on his condition, but Stephen turned him down. There's no time for that. I have something important to discuss. He instructed the Leviathan unit to transfer the weapons and equipment at the military factories and divide them for safekeeping. Defensive arrays and fortresses were to be inspected to make sure they were fully operational. The enemy was coming, and if they did nothing, they would all die by their hand. From his tone, it sounded like the end of the world was coming. Have things gotten that serious? Stephen nodded. As a last resort, we might have to start evacuating people to the Asura realm and have them stay there temporarily. As the astral thief, Thierry had roamed the six realms all his life, and he had some idea of who the ancient cultivators were. Even if he wanted to stay out of it, he couldn't. If the ancient cultivators took over the human realm, they would target the Mystic Covenant next. After they fell, they would have access to the six realms. With the Leviathan unit as their escort, Emmett and Seth went to the heart of the city to check on the military's defenses. When the leader of the Mystic Covenant was informed of the incident last night at Mariah's factory, he had a thorough analysis of the situation. Although the ancient cultivators were few in number, they were strong. If the faction sent out teams to track them down, it'd be the same as sending them to their deaths. To prevent needless casualties, it'd be best to wait for the ancient cultivators to come for them. The two high-ranking sentry guards gathered the elders, with the exception of Ren, who was busy with other responsibilities, and relayed the faction leader's orders. Our enemy is targeting the human realm. To be more specific, they're after Stephen and his country's military equipment. We'll use him as bait to lure the ancient cultivators out of hiding. The elders are instructed to round up separate squads from the expeditionary team and lead them to the human realm when the time comes. One of the elders voiced his doubts. Is it that easy to fool them? They've been freely stealing herbs, ores, and crystals from across the realm. No one has been able to stop them. It takes one slip-up to fall. Once they get careless, it'll be our time to strike. The two sentry guards used Stephen's name and publicly declared war. According to the announcement, Stephen refused to compromise and would be protecting the human realm supplies at all costs. He also advised the ancient cultivators to surrender if they didn't want to die. The ancient cultivators believed every word, and they were outraged by the threat. We shouldn't have held back last night. We should have at least cut off a few fingers or gouged an eye to let him know who he's dealing with. This is our chance to make our presence known. Stephen has waged a war on us. If we lose the fight, peace will return to the Elysian and human realms. We'll lose our momentum, and it'll be harder to confront the Mystic Covenant later on. If we're going to make a move, it has to be now. There aren't that many places for him to hide. We can't attack the Mystic Covenant directly, but the human realm is a different story. If he's not there, then we'll take his people as hostages and force him to submit. Annapolis had entered a first-level emergency combat preparation state, but even a watertight defense wouldn't be enough against the ancient cultivators. Stephen pinned his hopes on Ren's students, Emmett and Seth. The ancient cultivators are targeting me. If I stay here, the human realm will be in danger. From their threat, it sounded like they'll meet me one more time before resorting to other measures. Are you going to go back to the Elysian realm? Liam asked. I'll come with you. I am, but I'll be going alone. Stay here, and don't wander around by yourself. Stephen left Liam in Annapolis and went back to the Elysian realm alone. Not long after he stepped out of the rift, he heard about the letter of challenge under his name. The Mystic Covenant was out of his league, and there was a limit to how much he could influence them. There was nothing he could do about the letter of challenge. When Stephen arrived at the Mystic Covenant, Ren called him to his office. The other elders are leading teams of experienced members from the expeditionary team. They've disguised themselves as a transport fleet and are patrolling the highway nearby. If the ancient cultivators don't show up, it's highly likely that they're going to the human realm. Stephen couldn't calm down even with the preparations in place, but there was nothing he could do but wait. The distance between the Mystic Covenant's office building and the training ground wasn't that far. Gossip circulated among the new members of the expeditionary team. Stephen was skipping training sessions and frequenting Ren's office. He'd also issued a letter of challenge. His cultivation was low, but he'd somehow become famous in a short period of time. The hours ticked by, but there was no sign of the ancient cultivators. Stephen stood up and headed for the door. I don't think they're here. I'm going back to the human realm to check on things there. A true cultivator must have the heart as resilient and unshakable as stone. Emotions and desires can lead you astray. The path of cultivation is comparable to that of a god. Gods are witnesses of fate. The world is cruel, and not everyone can be saved. I know what you're trying to say, but I can't abandon my people. It hadn't been that long since Ren met Stephen, but he was beginning to understand why the prophet had taken him in as a student. He had more potential than most, but his most glaring flaw was his excessive concern and distractions around him. Even so, Ren believed Stephen was a talent that could be molded. He couldn't let his student be ambushed and killed on the way back to the human realm, so he went with them. When they left the rift in the skies above Annapolis, their attention was drawn to the smoke, flames, and explosions on the outskirts. Ren placed his hand on Stephen's shoulders before he could run off and swept his gaze over the explosion site. He couldn't detect any suspicious individuals. The ancient cultivators were either moving to another part of the city or attacking from afar. Don't rush into things. We could wait for them to show themselves. The ice dragon appeared next to Stephen. While you were gone, the Zodiac beasts went to the military. They haven't been attacked yet. What about the other places? The area is searching the city with Tristan and Zane. The ice dragon paused to transmit his voice to Stephen's mind. 2 of them are experienced thieves. Nothing can get past them. We should wait patiently. The 2 ancient cultivators who'd attacked Stephen at Mariah's factory were hiding in the library near the explosion site, observing the situation. There wasn't much chaos outside. Military personnel were the only people in the streets. The entire country had been under martial law since yesterday, and civilians had been instructed to stay home. The ancient cultivators spotted Stephen in the sky. He's only at the level of ascension, but he thinks he has what it takes to provoke us. He doesn't even know where we are. Let's continue this game of cat and mouse. The places with the most guards are the most important. If we attack them, we'll find out what they're hiding inside. Or better yet, let's just kill him. He's with an elder from the faction. Our task is cause a commotion. The rest will be left to the captain. If we can lure the Mystic Covenant to the human realm, we'll have an easier time picking them off in small groups. The ancient cultivators didn't need to use their energy to cause damage to the infrastructure around them. One of them picked up a coin on the floor and flicked it out the open window towards the gas station several streets down. The coin detonated the oil tank, and the gas station went up in flames. The fire spread along the streets to the residential area. The ice dragon lowered its altitude and extinguished the flames with a gust of ice and snow. Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader were on the ice dragon's back, searching for any trace of the enemy. Ren had gone back to the Elysian realm to tell the elders and their teams to come to the human realm. Their target is you, the Leviathan unit's leader said in concern. It's too dangerous for you to appear in the city. I can hide, but not forever. They're attacking the city because of me. I'll have to fight them eventually. A ray of light shot through the air. The ice dragon saw it coming and condensed a barrier of ice, but it couldn't deflect the attack. The instant the light pierced the barrier, the ice dragon tilted as fast as it could. The ray of light brushed past Stephen's ankle and shot straight through the ice dragon's left wing, leaving a hole the size of a fist behind. Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader reacted immediately. They dove for the ground in the opposite direction, from where the attack had come from. The ice dragon reduced its size in a flash of blue light, and Stephen caught its small form before landing and rolling to a stop behind a building. When he and the Leviathan unit's leader were safely out of sight, he opened his hand where the ice dragon was nestled. Blood from the hole in its wing dripped down his arm. You okay? The ice dragon spread its left wing, flicking blood across the pavement. The ice spread over the injury and staunched the bleeding. I've frozen the wound. It should be fine since I can't sense any residual energy. It'll heal soon. Stephen breathed a sigh of relief. Ever since they formed a blood contract, the ice dragon had never been injured, and they'd been through countless battles together. Stephen set the ice dragon down on his shoulder and summoned the threadworms. They condensed a mountain of iron sand that swept through the city. The sand became his eyes and ears. He saw 2 suspicious individuals in the library. Compared to the frightened civilians hiding at home, they were talking and laughing, as if they were playing an entertaining game. Their identities were obvious. Bury the library, Stephen instructed the threadworms. The iron sand surged over the library and shattered the windows, pouring inside. The threadworms solidified the sand and sealed the entire building. Thierry, Tristan, Zane, Ezra, the Empyrean Circle, the Palace members, and the Leviathan unit landed next to Stephen and the Leviathan unit's leader, prepared for a direct confrontation with the ancient cultivators. They waited, but there was no movement inside the black mass that used to be the library. You think they're dead from lack of oxygen? Tristan asked. The inside is completely sealed off from the street. Stephen shook his head. Probably not. They were trapped underground for thousands of years, but they're still alive. This isn't enough to kill them. Any weaknesses? None. Their bodies were reinforced with a special liquid. They're practically indestructible. Everyone looked at Stephen in disbelief, but he didn't seem to be joking. How were they supposed to fight against an enemy who couldn't be injured? The dome of iron sand glowed red and melted from heat. Molten iron flowed onto the street like lava as the 2 ancient cultivators broke free. Is this your answer? I have to admit, it's kind of disappointing. The Mystic Covenant had played dirty and gone behind Stephen's back to declare war on the ancient cultivators. Even if he explained himself, it would only sound like an excuse. There was no other option except to fight them head-on. The Empyrean Circle, the Palace, and the Leviathan unit made the first move. As they leaped into the fray, Stephen noticed that some of them were wielding unusual weapons. Where did those come from? Dr. Dalton and his team developed them while you were away, the Leviathan unit's leader said. The blades are covered with an electrical current, and some of them are holding poison grenades. Stephen wasn't the only one surprised by the weapons. The ancient cultivators were fascinated. I've never seen weapons like those before. How do you think they were made? Who knows? Guessing is pointless. Stephen has the answers to our questions. Kill his people and capture him. Then the mystery will be solved. The combination of thermal and electromagnetic energy made the blades even sharper than traditional weapons. One of the ancient cultivator's sleeves sizzled with heat when the blade brushed against him. Be careful. This is supposed to be an easy task. The captain is waiting for us. They don't have much going for them. They have unusual weapons on their side, but their cultivation is pitifully low. The ancient cultivators condensed their energy at the tip of their index finger, releasing it in a burst of light at the crowd. Trey and Ezra countered with a wave of energy crackling with ice and fire. The conflicting attributes amplified its damage as it crashed into a beam of light, setting off a series of explosions that shook the street. The ancient cultivators were getting impatient. Don't waste time with these small fries. Grab Stephen and let's get out of here. They increased their speed and emerged from the dust with swords in hand. Trey and Ezra leaped back, narrowly avoiding their strikes. The ancient cultivator on the right raised his sword to the sky, and a blade of light extended past the tip. Becoming our enemy has its consequences. It doesn't matter where you hide your friends and family. When we destroy the human realm, they'll die with everyone else. He smirked at Stephen and brought the sword down. A deafening explosion tore through the city. A jagged crack ran from the east to west. One strike had almost split the city in half. Luckily, the structured layout of the buildings prevented innocent lives from being lost. What happened to the defensive array? Was it never set up? Stephen asked nervously. It broke when the sword hit, the Leviathan unit's leader replied. Stephen was worried about Kim and Valeria. If the ancient cultivators discovered their existence, nothing could stop them from taking them hostage. From the corner of his eye, he noticed that the area had disappeared. Hopefully he could get his family and provide extra protection before the ancient cultivators found them. The Leviathan unit's leader unfurled his scroll, while Stephen materialized his sword. There was no way out of this except a full-on confrontation. Before either party could make a move, a crack tore through the space between them, and Ren stepped out of the rift. Crossing the spatial tunnel between the Elysian and human realms would take time. He had to prevent the conflict from escalating before the reinforcements arrived. Back when the Berserkers rebelled, Ren was one of the leaders who'd led a team to suppress them. They'd fought numerous battles against one another. The ancient cultivators recognized him with one glance. They stepped back warily. They were confident in taking down the humans, but an elder in the Mystic Covenant was different. Your vitality is truly a wonder, Ren remarked. I never thought you'd come back to the surface from the Holy Ruins. It's thanks to your faction's special liquid. You might be an elder, but we were once elite members of the Mystic Covenant. The gap between us isn't that big. Even the faction leader can't kill us in one blow, much less you. While Ren and the two ancient cultivators were locked in a stalemate, the captain of the ancient cultivators, NATO Run, entered the human realm with the others. Revenge was important, but they couldn't do it alone. They needed to awaken their companions in the Holy Ruins. They'd amassed a large storage of herbs and other resources from robbing the wealthy families on the outskirts of the Haven domain, but the medicinal pills and healing potions they had barely made an effect. The defensive array in the ruins had been broken through, but it was still active. It suppressed their companions' spiritual energy and cultivation. There was no sign of waking them up or recovering, no matter how many medicinal pills or healing potions they used. NATO Run decided to move them elsewhere to heal. He had a destination in mind, but he had to check it out first. It's a shame we don't have anyone experienced in healing on our team. We're skilled at fighting and killing, but healing wounds and saving lives aren't our forte. His subordinate reassured him. Don't worry too much, their spiritual energy is intact. Their prolonged hibernation could be a form of self-protection. Once they leave the ruins, the danger will disappear and they'll slowly wake up. I hope so. At this time, they were in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, 25 degrees north and 71 degrees west. These coordinates belonged to the mysterious Bermuda Triangle. Over the years, it was the topic of many rumors. Ships and planes would vanish only to reappear hundreds of years later. The chaotic magnetic field interfered with people's sense of direction, but it was a familiar presence to NATO Run and his team. Before the betrayal, they'd set up secret bases in other realms when they were on a mission. One of their bases was located in the deep sea of the Bermuda Triangle. After so many years, human civilization had advanced technology, but this part of the ocean was still untouched. NATO Run placed his hand over the surface of the ocean. A vortex swirled to life as the water parted, revealing the bottom of the sea. Our base is exactly the same as we left it. We can dive in. I'll take some time to move our companions from the ruins to our base. What should we do about Stephen? It's been a while since I've come to this realm, but human technology has developed to an unimaginable level. If we don't know what we're up against, we risk casualties among our team. We need to make preparations before launching a full-scale attack. As long as we're here, we're a thorn in Stephen's side, but there's nothing he can do about it. It won't be too late to take action after the Mystic Covenant goes back to the Elysian realm. The explosions in the sky above Annapolis were more radiant than the sun. Ren was facing off against two ancient cultivators. He wasn't at a disadvantage even though he was outnumbered, but the ancient cultivators weren't giving it their all. They attacked from a distance while keeping an eye on their surroundings. They knew how underhanded the Mystic Covenant can be. If they were too focused on the fight, they'd risk getting killed by a sneak attack. In the middle of the conflict, they received a voice transmission from NATO Run, ordering them to retreat. They tossed a sphere of light towards Ren. He sensed it wasn't a normal technique and headed to the ground. Just as he landed, the light burst into the sky, blinding everyone for 2 seconds. When they opened their eyes, the ancient cultivators were gone. I'm guessing their captain told them to leave, Ren told Stephen. His name is NATO Run, and he's ruthless. Before he betrayed his faction, his cultivation was on par with an elder's. He has extensive knowledge of the Mystic Covenant. If we recklessly chase after them, they might split up and come back to attack Annapolis, or go to the Elysian realm and attack the Haven domain while our forces are divided. The battle ended just as reinforcements from the Mystic Covenant arrived. The enemy had disappeared, so they turned around and headed back to the Elysian realm. The jagged crack running through Annapolis was a shocking sight. Construction vehicles gathered around the damaged terrain for repairs. Ren left with Emmett and Seth to search the vicinity for any sign of the ancient cultivators. Stephen hurried home and was relieved to find Kim and Valeria safe and sound in the living room. The flood dragon had shifted into a miniature version of itself and was playing with Valeria on the carpet. The Aerie stood next to them and greeted Stephen with a smile when he rushed into the room. A thief's escape is second to none. With me around, nothing will happen to your family. Thank you, Mr. Thierry, Stephen said gratefully. Despite the chaos in Annapolis, Kim didn't panic. After being with Stephen for so long, she'd seen, heard, and experienced a lifetime of bizarre incidents. The ancient cultivators had gone and went with the wind. Only 2 of them had shown up, and there was no telling where the rest of their companions were. They'd come back at any time. They were like a ticking time bomb with a countdown Stephen wasn't aware of. He was an unremarkable new member of the expeditionary team. He didn't have the authority to ask for assistance from the faction. The only person Stephen could think of who could give him guidance was the Prophet. He went up to his room and sat at his desk. He carefully infused a spiritual energy into the necklace the Prophet had given him. The translucent gem reflected the scenery of the garden of the Dragon Clan's castle. The Prophet was sitting in the shade below a towering tree. He opened his eyes when he sensed Stephen's aura. You seem to be at a dead end. I don't know if becoming an ascender was the right choice, Stephen admitted quietly. All I've done is put my friends and family in danger. When it comes to the destiny of a cultivator, there is no right or wrong. There are only choices and consequences. Once you walk the martial path, your fate is sealed. Ascension is inevitable. You're in a dilemma, but unfortunately, the Dragon Clan can't help you. We have a neutral position among the 6 realms. That's how we're able to evade conflict for so many years. However, there is a way out. Abandon your wealth and power and become a true cultivator. Then your enemy won't have leverage over you. Seeing Stephen's hesitation, the Prophet added, You're an ascender now. You have to start at the bottom of the hierarchy. If you don't focus on your cultivation, you'll be killed at some point in time. You aren't the only one who's gotten stronger. The people around you have too. Leave your duties in their hands. All things come to an end, but ascension doesn't necessarily mean leaving your old life behind. You'll have to say goodbye, but it won't be forever. Just for now, until you get stronger. One day, the dead end will open up, and the future will be yours to hold once more. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Ren, Emmett, and Seth had flown across the country in search of the ancient cultivators, but there was no trace of them. According to seniority, Emmett and Seth were Stephen's senior fellow students. Ren left them behind in the human realm to help with the aftermath in his stead, and shamelessly went back to the Elysian realm by himself. As for the other elders and their respective teams, they trudged back to the faction in shame. It was a disgrace to the Mystic Covenant's reputation to return empty-handed after a huge fanfare. Emmett and Seth understood their limits. They weren't strong enough to take down the ancient cultivators on their own. At best, they could only protect Stephen from them. The human realm is a great place to live. No wonder all these hostile forces want to invade. We don't know what the ancient cultivators are planning, but we suggest you bring your family to the Elysian realm if you want to keep them safe. I'll keep that in mind, Stephen said. Thank you for staying behind and helping us out. He went to the conference room in the military administration building alone. The luxurious chair at the head of the table was the work of a world-renowned designer. The carvings were detailed and exquisite, and the back was inlaid with gold and silver. It resembled the throne of a king. Stephen placed his hand on the edge of the table and ran his hand along the smooth surface. The time he'd spent in this room as the sovereign was much shorter than the time he'd spent as a martial artist, but he'd memorized every curve and every line etched onto the surface of the table. Before Stephen ascended, he'd always had a clear goal. He'd defended the borders from hostile countries overseas, protected the U.S. from ancient martial arts factions and malicious intentions, and explored dangerous places like Phantasma Isle, the Nether Graveyard, and the Underground Palace. Everything he'd done was to protect his friends, family, and country, and now he was the reason they were in danger. The sound of someone clearing his throat pulled Stephen from his reverie. He turned around and saw the Leviathan unit's leader, Liam, the Imperial Circle, and the others. Out of everyone in the military, they had the highest status. It had been a long time since Stephen was in this room, and they thought he'd called them over to discuss national affairs, but they didn't expect to find him lost in thought staring at the table. The Leviathan unit leader was reminded of the time Stephen retired from his position. Is there something you'd like to discuss, Mr. Adams? He asked, even though he already knew the answer. You're all here. I'm sure you've guessed it already, but today I'll be retiring from my position as the sovereign. It's time for me to step down and hand the authority to all of you. Everyone exchanged glances before staring at Stephen in confusion. Where was this coming from? The Leviathan unit's leader broke the silence. With the threat from the enemies of the Elysian realm 3 days ago, our country and our world could be in danger. We need a leader like you, even if it's only in name. All of you are the strongest martial artists in the human realm. You don't need me to manage the country anymore. I'm an ascender, and I can't stay more than a few days at a time. I'll have to keep leaving and coming back. This isn't the first time I've retired. Do what you did when I took on my position again. Management rights for my family's business will be handed over to the Ministry of Commerce Department. The profits will be returned to the National Treasury. I've already made arrangements, so there's nothing more to be said about that. I'll be leaving for the Elysian realm, but I'll keep in touch with everyone. This isn't goodbye. I'll see you all again. Stephen summoned 3 of the zodiac beasts, the monkey, the horse, and the snake. They transformed into their human forms and stood next to him respectfully. They'd expressed their interest in the human realm, so he decided to leave them here as a form of communication between the military and him while he was in the Elysian realm. If you need me, contact them and they'll let me know. With that, Stephen delegated the rest of his responsibilities and walked out of the military administration building. This was the lightest he'd felt in a long time. Tristan, Zane, and Thierry were waiting for him outside. They were well informed. They knew he was retiring, and it was also time for them to plan their own future. Tristan's obsession with treasures ran as deep as his teacher's. The world was full of wonders and places yet to be discovered. Things probably wouldn't change that much for him. As for Zane, the resentment he'd carried with him for thousands of years had finally been resolved with the fall of Tempest Citadel. Before he died, he wanted to ascend to start a new life, because he had nothing to live for in the human realm. But ever since he met Stephen, his circle had gradually expanded, and he'd grown attached to the people around him. Even if he couldn't ascend anymore, this was his second chance at life, and he would make the most of it. Thank you all for your help. You two have practically become a member of the military. Everyone in the Leviathan unit knows who you are. I'll give you an official position as martial arts instructors. I'll be leaving for the Elysian realm soon, but I'll come back to visit whenever I can. Thierry was the astral thief, a famous fugitive across the 6 realms. Even though he and Stephen had known each other for months now, he'd never shown his true strength. As Tristan's teacher, his obsession with treasure was even worse. "What are your plans? Do you want to settle down in the human realm too?" Thierry grinned as a cunning glint flickered in his eyes. "No, I have something else I want to do. The ancient cultivators are hiding somewhere in the realm. To create a powerful squad, the Mystic Covenant gave them a special liquid to soak in. They're almost indestructible. What I'm after is that special liquid. It's one of a kind." Sure enough, Thierry liked to live life on the edge. Given his status as the astral thief, Stephen couldn't say he was surprised. "Mr. Thierry, don't look down on the ancient cultivators. You know as well as I do how strong they are." "Don't worry. Before they betrayed the Mystic Covenant, they were sent on a mission to capture me. I ran away, of course. I might not be able to defeat them, but my skills in escaping are unmatched. Living a life of danger is thrilling and addictive. Want to come with me?" Unsurprisingly, Stephen decided to turn down Thierry's invitation to search for the ancient cultivators who almost killed him at Mariah's factory. He went home as fast as he could to avoid getting entangled with that strange, daredevil old man. One Tristan was enough. He didn't need another in his life. Kim was watching TV when Stephen walked in the door. The news was announcing the sovereign's retirement and the government's custody of his family's assets. "Will you regret giving up your company?" Stephen asked, leaning against a wall. Kim kept her gaze on the TV, as if she'd already sensed his presence before he said anything. "Why would I? I've lost interest in managing a business. We have enough money in our accounts for more than a lifetime. We could purchase all the banks in the country if we wanted to." "I don't know how much the Leviathan Unit's leader taught you, but your state of mind is as clear and calm as water." Kim perked up and pulled Stephen to the backyard. "Let me show you." She skipped to the garden. The leaves and petals hovered off the ground and swirled around her. Their tips were sharper than blades. "Ready?" The leaves and petals spiraled into two storms and swept towards Stephen. The air whistled as the beautiful garden turned into a wasteland. He held out his hand and compressed the wind, sending it back in the opposite direction. Kim's figure blurred and multiplied into a crowd of clones that looked exactly like her. When the storm crashed into one of her clones, the damage was transferred and divided among the others. "How did you do that? Each clone is an exact replica of your main body. They all have the same cultivation." Kim's eyes gleamed with amusement. "I can't reveal my teacher's secrets. If you want to know, come at me." Her clones surrounded Stephen with blades formed from the plants in the gardens in their hands. Stephen rushed up to one of the clones and grabbed her wrists. He could feel Kim's aura and her familiar presence radiating from the clone, even though her main body was standing behind the crowd. He crouched down and slammed his palm against the ground, enveloping the garden in a storm of sand and dust. The clones tried to escape, but they were one step too late. The storm swept over them, and they dispersed in a scatter of light. Leaves and petals rained from the sky, covering Kim in fall foliage. Stephen never thought there would come a day when he sparred with Kim in martial arts. It was thrilling. "Want to keep going?" "My clothes are all dirty," she complained. Stephen laughed and brushed the leaves and petals from her hair and clothes. He didn't know how the Leviathan Unit's leader had done it, but she'd progressed to the early stage of the immortal realm in such a short time. She only had 2 realms left before ascension. The Leviathan Unit's leader had told them that she had an aptitude for cultivation, even though she'd never tried it before, but he had no idea she was this talented. Once she got the hang of it, everything else fell into place. He hoped her cultivation would continue to be smooth sailing. There were many martial arts techniques out there that could create clones, and it was rare to encounter a technique that could create this many exact replicas. Stephen decided to teach Kim the void technique. She sat cross-legged on the carpet in the living room as the contents flowed into her mind. It only took her half an hour to comprehend it. 2 slits appeared on her palms. They were designed to absorb energy. No one would know there were openings resembling mouths unless she activated them. Kim was fascinated, but also a little horrified. "This is like straight out of a horror movie." "You'll get used to it. Absorbing external energy is more efficient than meditating to increase your energy reserves. Try absorbing these." Stephen dumped a pile of colorful stones in the middle of the room. They were high-grade minerals from the Elysian realm. Kim placed her hand over top the pile and felt like she'd been turned into an inflatable ball with no limit. An endless stream of energy surged inside her and flowed through her meridians. The energy she'd consumed during her spar with Stephen was instantly replenished. "This is amazing. If I absorb the essence of these stones during a battle, doesn't that mean I'll have an unlimited supply of energy?" "It's not practical because battles are decided in an instant. You won't have time to replenish your energy, but they'll come in handy sometimes. As your cultivation increases, you can absorb energy through your opponents." Stephen showed Kim the token from the Mystic Covenant. It had many uses. He infused his spiritual energy into the token, and the smooth metallic surface reflected the faction's training hall. A familiar senior member was explaining the cultivation manuals in front of him. New members of the expeditionary team spend most of their time cultivating, Stephen explained. The senior members and sometimes the elders are responsible for teaching them. They're given missions when they get stronger. Kim looked at the crowd of cultivators listening to the senior members' teachings and felt an overwhelming wave of pressure. She subconsciously trembled. Stephen wrapped his arm around her shoulder and pulled her close. It's okay, don't be nervous. This is a natural reaction to cultivators much stronger than you. When you ascend to the Elysian realm, every person you pass by on the street will be like them. That's kind of scary. There's nothing to worry about. I'll be with you. They made themselves comfortable on the couch and listened attentively. The new members seemed to have forgotten Stephen and Liam's existence. They weren't aware of the crisis in the human realm. Emmett and Seth were sightseeing and had no plans to urge Stephen to head back to the faction. If Ren needed them for something urgent, he would send them a message. Liam was also taking a break from the Elysian realm to take care of work at the Leviathan Unit's headquarters and spend time improving his cultivation. Stephen had asked Ren if he could take on another student so Liam would have some more flexibility in his schedule, but he said that was impossible because the other elders would never let him have all of the Prophet's students. While Stephen was spending time with his family, the other countries began to get restless. They'd heard that the U.S. had overcome a crisis within the past few days. The head secretary of Warhawk's parliament, Hilskin, and the higher-up Sawyer had a secret meeting with Maplewood's strategic advisor and diplomat Walter. Ambitions of politicians were never ending. They would only stop for a moment in the face of a threat. Walter took off his sunglasses and rubbed his temples. He couldn't conceal the exhaustion in his features. He'd worked tirelessly for days on end to gather information about the U.S. to no avail. What do you two make of the United States' public announcement? The sovereign retired, but that doesn't mean he's dead. We can't take advantage of the turmoil if he's still around. Walter's approach was conservative. Ever since Warhawk and Maplewood's fleet was ruined by the ocean disaster, Maplewood's naval strength had decreased significantly. They couldn't risk starting a conflict at sea, nor could they send troops to another country to fight a war. Even though they weren't as strong as before, Maplewood and Warhawk's strongest ally and Hilskin had to rope Walter in. Don't be so quick to make a decision. Stephen borrowed thousands of our genetically modified martial artists for a short time, and, in exchange, we still occupy 1/5 of the shares in Cadis. The port is closed to the U.S. It's our responsibility to our countries to investigate the truth. Hilskin didn't bring up the topic of war again, which made it hard for Walter to refuse. A few hours later, an inconspicuous commercial transport ship docked at Cadis's port. They claimed they were here for an inspection for their businesses and that they didn't need to inform the officials. Warhawk had established a 5-star luxury hotel overlooking the ocean. Many diplomats reserved a room here when they visited. Hilskin and Walter did the same. Hilskin stood by the window and gazed at the ocean. I've been waiting for a long time, but there's no sign of conflict in Cadis's waters. The king is on good terms with the U.S. From the standpoint of a world power, his choice is understandable, Walter said. The two of them observed the establishment by the port, more than half of the United States' commercial logo. Cadis was a commercial treasure with unlimited potential, and it was in the hands of the U.S., not theirs. An intelligence officer entered the room and gave them a handful of photos. The sovereign isn't dead, and he wasn't injured from the latest crisis. Annapolis is mostly intact. The photos were high definition. A sword had cut out a jagged crack running through Annapolis, and by a stroke of luck, it had avoided residential and military buildings. The flames and destruction of war were nowhere to be seen, and there was no trace of the sovereign's mangled body. Repairs were in full swing. The damaged terrain was surrounded by construction vehicles. We have confirmed the time and place these photos were taken. The sovereign is safe and unharmed. After the crisis was resolved, he announced his retirement. Who attacked Annapolis? Hilskin asked. The last time they were sighted was at the eastern port. They dove into the ocean to disappear. The United States' intelligence agency couldn't find any leads. That's strange. They're a major world power. Who would openly target them? Was it an enemy from another dimension? They didn't have sufficient evidence to prove their speculation, but Walter had a reliable suggestion. The sovereign has retired from his responsibilities. We should go through the regular diplomatic procedures and pay the upper management a visit. Then we'll subtly ask them about the sovereign's status. The abdication of the leader of a country was similar to a king passing his throne to an heir. It was an attention-grabbing incident. The Diplomatic Affairs Department in the United States had been busy ever since the sovereign announced his retirement, and the higher-ups of the military had set up a temporary office here for convenience. The outside world was noisy and chaotic, but Stephen and his family enjoyed a leisurely life in their villa. No one came to bother them, but their peace was short-lived. Emmett and Seth visited their home with the latest news and a message from Wren. The new members of the expeditionary team have been cultivating for a while. It's time for them to take an exam. Mr. Wren wants us to tell you, you can't keep lazing around the human realm. Stephen didn't think he had much of a chance. Emmett and Seth didn't go into the details of the exam, but if it was a spar between members, he would lose without a doubt, even if killing the opponent was prohibited. The Asura chief, Kagan, had been selected to join the team, but he was a no-show after the first day. That was one less thing to worry about, but he had a long list of enemies, like Shaddle and the Sheridan brothers. He had been caught up in the human realm's affairs ever since he became a member, and he rarely had time to focus on his cultivation until now. He would definitely make a fool of himself during the exam. This is a bit sudden. Can't you come up with an excuse for me so I can sit this one out? Please think about Mr. Wren's reputation, Emmett urged. The other elders have taken on outstanding students, and there's a lot of competition. Whether it was a blessing or a curse, Stephen couldn't avoid participating. He could only hope he didn't have to deal with any annoying opponents. The rewards are beneficial to new members because they have to improve their cultivation to take on missions, Seth added. If they perform well during the exam, they'll receive weapons, cultivation pills, or other opportunities. Stephen pretended to be interested out of respect for his fellow students, but he had more important things to worry about. The ancient cultivators were still out there. He'd retired from his position as the sovereign, but that only lessened the target on his back. His family could still be in danger. A majority of the public wasn't aware of the sovereign's daughter, but most of them knew he was married. He could hide Valeria with the Sierra family, but not Kim. He had to help her ascend as soon as possible. A popular tourist attraction was located to the west of the Bermuda Triangle. There had been many cases of attacks from marine life lately, deterring people from entering the water. The culprit was the captain of the ancient cultivators, NATO Run. In the depths of the ocean where the sun didn't shine, a meteorite drifted within the waves. When it struck Earth thousands of years ago, the impurity within the stone was blown away, leaving behind its metallic core an uneven external structure. The ancient cultivators had found the meteorite while they were on their mission and set a base up here. NATO Run's mood had brightened considerably ever since they moved their hibernating companions to their base. Their mental energy was slowly recovering, and they would regain consciousness within 10 days. The Mystic Covenant's auras had disappeared from the human realm, and it was time to plan their next course of action. NATO Run had heard about Stephen retiring from his position. The authority wasn't his anymore. It was divided among the upper management. Going after him would be a waste of time, and it would make too much noise. We need to act secretly. If we cause too much commotion, the Mystic Covenant will send their people to the human realm again. We need time to prepare before we attack them. His subordinate, Parati, held up a map in the flickering flame and pointed to the nearest shore. Warhawk and Maplewood are enemies with the U.S. They worked together in the past to defend against the Asuras, but not anymore. Warhawk is especially antagonistic. NATO Run hadn't heard of any particularly strong cultivators from Warhawk. Their parliament was full of old and weak politicians. With that, their destination was set. Their next target would be Warhawk.